got home from after having that meeting in Melbourne, and then I had to quit that day and say to my boss, I'm moving to the other side of the world to go start a career in Formula One. I kind of feel cringe having all my Aston stuff out, but they are cool vibes. We'll start with this anyway. If I was wanting to get into Formula One in 2026, this is how I would do it. Now, there's kind of two routes that you can go with here. One of them doesn't outweigh each other. They're both valid in their own right. The one that I've gone through is the in-house route. It started freelance, but it very much reached a point where, well, you can be a freelancer within F1, and opportunities with teams do exist. But if you just want to be embedded within a team and be employed by a team, then that's kind of the journey that I've gone on. And then the freelancer journey, which is what I'm on now, we can kind of dig into in another video if you wanted to see that. So I guess broader context as to where this all began was back in, well, I've been a car fan my whole life. Formula One didn't really come into my life that much other than my parents showing it to us when we were younger. But it was never like my thing, or never like, I was never obsessed with it. And that's not a slate on the sport. It's, Australia was far away, and for me, it just wasn't a thing really that much. I got introduced to it more in like the Red Bull, like Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel era. And that's when I kind of remember like noticing it. I went to my first race in 2015 with my family. We drove down to Melbourne for the Grand Prix, and that was an incredible experience. But even then, going to that, I never actually thought that I would ever work in this space, let alone, be involved in it, I guess, in the way that I've been involved with it. So, go back however many years, I've always loved photography, I've always loved videos, and have kind of had a camera around at some point for a long part of my life, and especially around cars. It wasn't until I was at university doing my design degree that I kind of like switched into gear of being like, all right, maybe there's actually something tangible here beyond just a hobby. So had been taking photos at university with my friends. We used to go out, used to wear sneakers a lot. It was kind of into my fashion, but the classic hype beast fashion of the late 2015s and onwards. And then one day I said to my friend Ethan, I was like, oh, there's a Cars and Coffee on this weekend. Do you want to go? And he was like, yeah, sure, like, let's go. And I was like, oh, I'm going to bring my camera along and just go out and take some photos. So, went along, not really thinking too much about it, was just taking some nice photos and, enjoying the day. Like, it's just great to see these cars, chat to different owners and those sorts of things. And, I felt like I got some really good stuff, and then kind of came out of it. And at the time, my Instagram, I'd just been posting, like I said, like, travel stuff, scenery, shoes, maybe the occasional car, because I still did enjoy them, but I'd never like gone out and shot them properly. And then I posted a photo of a black BMW M2 and it turned out to be owned by a guy who I now call a good friend named Jeff. And he was like, hey, like, I love this photo, love what you do, would you want to come take photos of it? And I was like, yeah, cool, sounds great. And that was kind of it. That was that first moment of like people seeking me out, I guess, for my craft beyond just like university and those sorts of things. And that kind of snowballed into meeting so many more people, so many more owners. So I guess, why am I telling you this? Because that would be my guidance for the first step of this process, is just go off and shoot whatever you can, and go off and shoot whatever you can that's kind of relevant to the space. So in F1, everyone kind of gets caught up in the cars, but an important part of it is so much around it. It's, it's scenery, it's people, it's teams, it's storytelling beyond just automotive, which I think, the car stuff came later on, but very much focused on so many other things beyond just that. And, you really kind of have to just be going out and, working on your craft. Like, and to be fair, like, you don't need a degree to be a content creator in this space. Like, it helps, like, for some things, and like some tangible skills that, have helped me and helped me become art director. But to be a content creator these days, like, there's so many YouTube tutorials, there's so many, I don't know, master classes, like so many different things that you can get access to for free, that you are kind of the limiting factor in how skilled and how recognizable your style becomes. And that kind of brings me on to the next point, is like really focus on like what your style is, especially nowadays. Like there's so many people around, so many creators, so many people with cameras, that it's like unless you have like a definitive style, your work will fall into this like ether of just like nothing. Like there's so many different people out there doing different things, and that's not to take away from any of it, but if you want to stand out, which you need to get to Formula 1, then really just like hone in that style, hone in that craft. You'll have to do it for free. As much as people say don't do it for free in the early stages, just do it. It's the best thing you can do, and you'll learn so much more by networking, meeting people, and then people will start to want to pay you anyway, because that's what comes next, is that people will then start to say like, oh, how much do I owe you for your time? You know, as a starting creative, that will kind of shock you. You'll be like, oh my god, like people will pay me for this, and I went through that as well. And just keep going through that. And so in my time in Sydney, I started shooting car events. I started doing more private shoots. I started working with brands. So I worked with like Mercedes out in Australia before I left. And then, through all these things and like meeting people, I met another close friend of mine named Jaden. And he put up an Instagram story, and he was like saying basically, oh, there's this really cool job going for this agency in Formula One. Now, at this point, I was like, I'd not really known about the agency world other than the one I was working for, let alone in motorsport, but then also Formula One. It's like, oh, there's like careers in this. It's like, I didn't even realize that was a thing. And it was a really compelling job advert. And I was like, you know what, like this kind of seems like a really cool opportunity that I can't turn down. Now at this point, I'd done so many shoots and started working with brands that I'd built up that personal portfolio. And that's probably the really important part of the, if you want to, be in the room for these jobs, even, it's like, that's the hardest part, is just getting into the room. Because if you've got a personality of any sort and able to chat and get there, then that'll get you a long way. But to get yourself in that room, you need to have the work to back it up. And so I was at my current job at an agency in Sydney after I'd graduated, was sitting there, and then I was like, you know what, like I'm going to go down and try and meet these people. So I DM'd them on Instagram, and I was like, hey, like really interested in this role. I'm actually going to be at the Grand Prix this weekend. Would love to come down and see you. I was not planning on being down there that weekend. I hadn't got a ticket. I hadn't had any kind of thought as to how I was actually going to get there. But I just thought, all right, if they say yes, then I'm just going to have to make this happen. And then lo and behold, they replied, they saw my page, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to chat. Come on down. We'll see you this weekend. So literally the next day I was like, all right, I'm going to need to buy a ticket, which at the time was pre-Drive to Survive. So ticket prices for the LSGP were a lot less than what they are now. And I drove down the next day and basically was just hanging around until they're like, yeah, we'd love to come meet you. And then that was it. So I ended up getting the message, like, they're very busy people on the ground. There's a lot going on. And then finally got to be like, oh, we'd love to catch up. And ended up chatting for 15 minutes. And they were like, yeah, we love your work. Can you move over? And I was just like saying yes to everything. I was like, yep, I'd love to do it. I'm the right person for this job. And then they were like, cool, that's it. And that was it. 15 minutes, done and dusted. And then I had to get back for work for next day. So I drove home, not really knowing where that was going to go. But I felt like the meeting went really well, and that was it. And then what that led to was then a phone call. What that led to was a phone call about a month later, because it was a few races back to back at the time. And they were like, hey, do you think you could start in a month? And I was like, of course, like, why not? Obviously at this point I was still working for the agency in Sydney. I had no plan of getting over there, but I was like, yeah, sure, I'll make it work. So I said yes to the job. And at this point, it wasn't a full-time job. This was just a 6-month contract for a handful of races. But I was like, you know what? Like, if I just get 6 months out of this, I'll make it work. And, I can say it was a cool adventure, and that was it. So I applied for a visa, sent off my passport, quit my job, all in the same day. And then essentially what happened was like the most stressful 5 weeks because of the type of visa I was going for, which was an ancestry visa. And then the first race that I was meant to do was the Canadian Grand Prix. Now, in the lead up to this, it was like, all right, I should be getting my passport, It didn't actually arrive until the day I was meant to leave. So I had to call up and push my flights back a day. And so I turned up on media day at the Canadian Grand Prix. Most stressful time in my life. And then, or I guess up until that point. Yeah, and I had to live on the road between the Canadian Grand Prix and the French Grand Prix for 3 weeks. So I had my entire life in a suitcase. I almost got kicked off a French flight because my bags were overweight, but I threw out all my toiletries just to make weight. Luckily, she didn't make me do anything with my cameras, and then just kept on going, and then eventually got to the UK, and then that was kind of where it kind of started to settle. And I think I ended up at 7 or 8 races that year where I was shooting for a bunch of different brands around Formula One, with a amazing agency, and they're lovely people. But I guess, why am I telling you this whole kind of story of like, if you want to get into this world, it's going to take a lot. For most people watching this, whether you're UK based or around the world, you need to be willing to kind of go where the work is. And for Formula One specifically, 9 times out of 10, unless it's Ferrari or maybe Cadillac, you're going to need to base yourself in London. Which isn't a bad thing. I love London, and I've lived here for 7 years now, and I don't plan on going back anytime soon, so would highly recommend it. But you need to be willing to make those moves, because you have to put yourself in the place where the work is. So there's that. And then there's also just like network. You never know who you're going to meet, that their name will come up so far down the line, and you'll be like, oh my God, I remember meeting that person, which has happened to me so many times in this world, especially Formula One and motorsport, that, the best thing you can do is just be nice, meet people. Don't meet people to get something out of it. Like, just meet people for the sake of meeting people, and you'll go off on your journey, they'll go off on theirs, and you just never know when that's going to come full circle. But the nicer you can be, the friendlier you can be, and the more you can, build that social skill of just, interacting, throwing yourself into the deep end. I would consider myself an introvert before I started in this world, and now I'm here and I can just go off and go into a room and kind of speak to anyone. So that would be a big part of what, what is that would be a big part of what I think is required to kind of make it in this world. So, I guess the turning point throughout all this happened just before COVID. So 2019 was my first season. And again, was traveling, doing all this stuff, and then that got shut down. And so for most of 2020, I was working in Australia from home, and then got the call up to come back for one race, which was Portugal in 2021. Oh no, sorry, which is Portugal in 2020, in the first race where they had fans back. And around that time, a friend of mine basically had put me in touch with the owner of an agency that was in charge of the Racing Point account at the time, and they were looking to have a content creator, that was able to shoot like photo, video, edit, like kind of like a jack of all trades. Now, I hadn't necessarily considered going into a team full time, but then, I was still on this journey, and, I was loving the work and was having fun doing it, and, starting to build a bit of a reputation. So I was like, you know what, like this feels like the right opportunity, to really kind of push. And also I feel there was a point where I remember when the Aston Martin announcement got made, where I was like it was kind of like, it's going to sound really wishy-washy, but it was like, I felt when that happened, I was like, this role feels like that, like this team feels like there's something for me. And so I'd actually started looking for who worked at that team, and nothing ever came from it because I couldn't find the people, because I was still quite new at the time. And then, had just, by chance was put in touch with the agency owner, and had an interview, and then there was an edit challenge. And when I say I stayed up for 48 hours straight to get this edit done, Like, I put my absolute everything into it. Now, there's a lot of, I guess, like opinions on edit challenges, and also challenges in general for jobs. But if it's a job that you really want, then you need to make the time to do it. Now, I was still traveling at this point when this job had come up, and I I made the time. I put in every bit of creative thought that I could. And in fairness, I still think that edit would hold up today. There was some stuff I did in that I think was, top notch, but that was like I put everything into that. And then a week later, got the call and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you on board, to be full time with Aston Martin." And that was kind of the start of this new journey. Now, I guess looking at the space for what it is now, it's a really hard spot of there's so many people trying to get into it. But on the flip side, having done hiring now in this space, like, if you just focus on refining your craft and getting better and better, and like I said earlier, like building your style, building your vision and bringing that to life, yourself, you'll go so much further. Because the amount of times that I would see it in, whether it's show reels or different edits, it's like, this could be done by anyone. It could have been done, you know, by like relative amateur, and also it's like the involvement wasn't there. But it's like, if I see someone that's like gone out creating stuff for themselves, building a social media following, but building it with their work, not building it like the not to be, seen, then those are the sorts of things that go so much further. And so I would say focus on being creative, not being a creator, because you will become a creator by being creative. And it's like, you will get to that space, you will get to that world, but you need to hone in on your craft and show that you have something different to offer. Because the amount of people that come into this space that are focused on just being in it is insane. And the if you want to make an impact, you have to have like a style, a vision, a voice. And then these jobs do come up for F1 teams, but you have to have the body of work to make them look at you, especially now where it's like thousands and thousands of people are applying for them. You need to have something different that says, I'm worthwhile. Now, there's a whole plethora of things that I could probably go at and talk to you like some boomer and say, work hard, put your mind to it. But if you're trying to get into Formula One, it is the most competitive space in the world, like through and through. Like, everyone is trying to get there, especially now. So if you're not willing to put in the reps to get there, so if that's not doing little edits for yourself, if that's not doing, you know, slightly less work and like going off and networking, like the best thing you can do is just go to like your local racetracks and just try and film people racing. But the one thing as well that I would say is that like focus on learning how to tell stories that isn't just cars and drivers, because there's such a small part of an entire race weekend that the true creativity is what you can do around that. And that was really how I was able to grow, Aston and Fernando's TikTok to like completely different levels, was because I was looking beyond just making a meme with a driver. Okay, maybe with Fernando it's slightly different, but for the team it was like, how can I bring the mechanic stories to life? How can I bring the team back home to life? The hospitality, the environment, the vibes, the city. Like, everyone does scene setters now and all this different stuff, but no one was doing that back when I'd started. So look where other people aren't looking and really focus on what you can do to separate yourself and separate your work. Now, I feel like a lot of this is probably sounding a bit repetitive, but I'm just trying to kind of give you a bit of a steer as to what I think will help you get to those positions. Because honestly, it's like, just work hard so that when those opportunities rise, like, you can take advantage of it. Because as soon as you're in it and you have to go, oh shit, I'm applying for this job now, and you'll know if your work isn't right. You can shoot your shot and it might work, but if you put in the work, odds are it'll go a lot further and you'll get noticed by the right people. And that's also the thing as well, is that it's like, if you're just putting in those reps, funnily enough, people see your work and they'll reach out to you, and that can be your opportunity. So it doesn't just have to be go off and grind and those sorts of things. It's like, the more you do it, the more people will see it and want to interact with your work. But just make sure you're focusing on building your style and building your vision. Now, this is a lot of waffle, and gosh, if anyone got this far, then well done. But this has obviously been my journey, and then there's so many more parts to that journey, but that is kind of like, I guess, probably worth another video of like, once I'd made it into the team, I then became like, did Fernando and Aston's TikToks and became art director and all these sorts of things. And that's probably a video in itself. But I think just focus on that journey beforehand, because I think the one really important thing to take from all this is focus on the journey, not the result. And if you put the effort in the journey, you will get the result. But if you're just purely focused on the result, then you're not going to be focused on the little things that build up to get you to where you want to be. So if that's the one takeaway from all that, like, listen to the things that I've said about like going off, doing shoots, meeting people, networking, and apply that to what you're doing to try and be that content creator. Within that, there's a whole bunch of waffle, and maybe not. I guess within that, there's a whole bunch of kind of convoluted, maybe not actionable steps, but just do the work. The actionable steps are going to be fairly boring, of apply for jobs when they come up. But if you haven't done the work, then there's no point in applying, because all the people that have done the work will get those jobs. So just keep on working at it, keep on focusing. And, if you've actually got questions about what does that look like, ask me. And, I'm here on this journey on YouTube and starting it so I can start to connect and help people, experience the journey that I have, because that's what I want to bring, is that creativity is for all, and this space is amazing, and I want to be able to help people get into it. So ask me questions and I'll do my best to reply. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.